Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to BriefingsDirect. Our business innovation thought leadership discussion today focuses on the changing role and impact of accounts payable as a strategic business force. We'll explore how intelligent accounts payable is rapidly transforming by better managing exceptions, to adopting fuller automation, to implementing end-to-end processes that leverage connected business networks. As the so-called digital enterprise adapts to a world of increased collaboration, digital transactions, and e-payables management, accounts payable is needing to adapt in 2016. To learn more about the future of AP as a focal point of automated business services, we're joined by two guests. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Bartolini, the Chief Research Officer at Ardent Partners in Boston. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. Great to speak to you again, Dana.
Good to have you with us. We're also here with Drew Hoffler, Senior Director of Marketing at SAP Ariba. Welcome, Drew.
Thank you, Dana. Good to be here.
Yeah. Drew, let's look at this situation where we've got more things going on digitally. We have a need to improve efficiency. Accounts payable has been shifting, but why will 2016 make a difference? What should we expect in terms of seeing accounts payable elevate its role in the enterprise or in commercial organizations?
Accounts payable is one of those areas that everybody looks at first and foremost as a cost center. And so when accounts payable looks at what they can do better, they have typically thought about efficiency, cost savings first. That's the plus side of a cost center, is saving money by spending less. But I think in 2016, what we've been seeing happening over the last year or so, and what I think will accelerate in 2016, is that AP begins to move more from just a cost savings and efficiency focus to value creation. And this is where they sit in the hub of one of the three critical elements of working capital, inventory, receivables, and payables. And accounts payable sits squarely on that last one. And they have influence over that which affects a company's working capital. This has become so very important for companies, accounts payable, by creating the efficiencies in the invoice process, opens up opportunities, and they're going to be able to affect a company's working capital for the positive going forward. And I think that's gonna grow as they move beyond just the automation that is the foundation to then seeing the opportunities that come out of that.
Okay. Andrew, do you see accounts payable also as a digital hub of some sort, growing in its role and influence and somehow being able to increase its value beyond cost efficiency into these other higher innovation levels or strategic levels of benefit?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So I've been working in the space for 17 years, doing pretty significant market research over the last 11 years, and so I've been tracking the trends and sort of the ebbs and flows of relative interest and investment in AP. And what we've seen in 2015 in some of our most recent research is that there has been a broader focus or a shift away from viewing the AP opportunity as an efficiency one or solely an efficiency one, right? Let's automate, let's reduce our costs in processing invoices, let's reduce our costs in payments. But what we saw this year really for the first time in our research was that the top area of focus, the top business pressure that's driving investments in AP transformation was the need to get better visibility into all of the valuable information that comes across the AP the AP departments or through the AP operation, both on the invoice and the payment side. And what that does is that begins to change the conversation or really, we talked about the evolution, right, of accounts payable moving from a strictly back office siloed department to an increasing point of collaboration with procurement at the P2P process, with Treasury from a cash management perspective. And really now we see it starting to move as becoming really a true intelligence hub. And that's something that I think we've seen some great momentum and there's a lot of wind in the sails for AP and really pushing that forward in 2016 and beyond.
Andrew, what's driving this? Is this the technology that's now allowing that data?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? I think that there are a couple factors that sort of are underlying this movement. I think the first is taking the broader perspective within business as a whole, right? Business functions can enterprises, businesses can no longer, allow distinct business functions to operate within silos, right? They need everybody, on the same team, rowing in the same direction. And so that has forced greater collaboration. That's something that we've seen more broadly between procurement and finance over the past couple of years, and specifically with the role of the CPO and the CFO, we see now a majority of organizations that see a very strong level of collaboration within those two job roles and within their departments as a whole. And so that has opened up, sort of larger opportunities for AP, which is more is a more tactical function as it relates to procurement. But by bringing the two groups together, you've got now shared resources and shared focus on really improving the entire source to settle process. And so, that relationship is driven greater interest because the opportunities are fantastic for procurement to leverage the value of a more efficient AP process and to be able to see the information that's there. And in a more similar way, or as Drew mentioned, right, by becoming more efficient on the front end of the AP process, right, organizations are doing a better job in reducing the amount of paper that's coming in through the front door. They're processing their invoices faster. That's opening up opportunities on the back end, on the payment side. And so I think that you have a confluence of those factors, and I think you see some newer solutions in the marketplace as well that are really changing the view that AP departments are maybe having of themselves, of what defines a transformation, and thinking more holistically across the entirety of the AP process, from invoice receipt all the way through payment and settlement.
Right. Now, Drew, it seems that over the history that once a contract is closed, the terms remain fairly rigid, and then there's a simple fulfillment aspect to it. But it sounds like as we get more visibility, as we get digitized and we can automate, we also can handle exceptions, but we can also seemingly bring in variables. So I've heard instances where the terms can be adjusted, that market forces can provide for ways in which a deal gets amended as an ongoing basis, whether it's the terms of payment, whether perhaps there are other ancillary issues. Is that what we're seeing, that the digital transformation is giving us more opportunity to be flexible, and is that then elevating the role of the AP organization?
Yeah, you make a couple good points there, and it really springs off of what Andrew just said about not being able to, or not having to silo, or not staying in that siloed place where AP and procurement are separate, or the processes are separate. Because I think what companies have realized, particularly as the digital age has made it possible, and that is that the procure to pay process, the source to settle process, is a fundamentally connected one. Over the years, they have operated very disconnectedly with handoffs, where procurement does its thing, writes the contract, and then hands it off once the PO goes out the door, and then AP takes up the process from there. But in that, there are a lot of disconnects. Now, when you're able to bring the systems together, and networked systems together, to bring visibility across that entire process, now you've got the accounts payable group acting in a more strategic manner to deliver value by acting as the value capture group. So, for example, on a contract, prior to this age that we live in now, a contract would be written. It would have specific terms for specific items, specific prices for specific SKUs, and maybe some volume discounts. But accounts payable had no idea about that, because those contracts would get signed and they'd get put in a file cabinet or stuck in a PDF file somewhere. And accounts payable had no idea, so they went off of the invoice that came in. And this is how an entire industry about post-audit recovery came about, right? To go after the fact and try to claw back overpayment because there's no visibility in AP to what procurement did. So by bringing these together in a system on a network, you're able to automatically capture those savings because AP now has visibility into what's happening inside of that contract and can ensure on an automated basis that they're paying the right amount. So it becomes not just a buy right thing from the procurement side, but a pay right thing as well. You have buy right and pay right tying together. But then to your point about terms, yes, you have certain terms tied into that contract, but again, that's set at the beginning of a relationship with a supplier. And there are lots of opportunities that come up when everybody has visibility into what's going on, into an early approved invoice, for example. There are lots of opportunities that arise for collaboration where maybe the situation has changed a little bit. Maybe a supplier now, instead of being paid in 45 days, would very much like to be paid in 5 days because they have payroll to hit or they have an equipment purchase to make and they want to accelerate their cash flow. Well, that in a disconnected world, you can't account for that. But in a networked world where there is visibility, I like to say that it's the confluence of visibility, opportunity, and capability, where all parties have visibility into the opportunity created by deficiencies with that early approved invoice, and then the capability inside the system to simply click a button and accelerate that cash flow or modify those terms on that contract and those payment terms. So this idea of procure to pay being a linked value chain, and that the digital technology of today now can actually bring those together so that there are no barriers to that information flow, creates all sorts of opportunities for all parties involved.
Right. Now, Andrew, we're having a common denominator here of visibility. The visibility is what allows for a lot of these efficiencies and innovation values to occur. Where does that visibility come from? Where does the data get generated? How is it shared? And how do we further reduce the silos through the free flow of data analysis and information?
Right. So visibility, at the core starts with automation tools that automate processes, right? So if we're looking at the P2P process, right, you're looking at an e-procurement system. I mean, you can go back to where Drew started, right? I mean, from sourcing and contracting, right? If you have contract visibility or at least visibility into your header level information, you begin to have an understanding of what in fact the relationship is and what relationships you have as an organization. Who are your preferred suppliers? Who are your strategic suppliers? As you start to drill down and begin to capture, if you have the capabilities to capture things like payment terms and SLAs, that information begins to provide a more robust view of the relationship that can then be more strategically managed from a procurement perspective, and then really sets up from the operational procurement side. If you have an e-procurement system, you're able to generate purchase orders against those contracts, and you're ensuring that before the purchase order is even sent to the supplier, that the pricing and the terms are correct. That cascades over onto the accounts payable automation side. We use the term e-payables, very broadly to describe AP automation solutions. When you have an e-procurement and an e-payable solution connecting, you begin to have great visibility within the enterprise for the entirety of the relationship and the entirety of the transaction. And on the flip side, right, we haven't even really gotten to the value proposition for suppliers who really view their customer relationship as a single one, right? And what often happens is they have multiple relationships within that customer base that really aren't needed, right? They negotiate a contract, they have their internal customer, and then they're dealing with maybe a procurement department, and then trying to then figure out who they're dealing with on the AP side. When you've got visibility that can be shared with trading partners, you get extraordinarily greater value out of the entire thing, and you streamline relationships, and you're able to really focus on the more important aspects of those relationships. But to the original question, visibility starts and ends with technology.
Right. We're also seeing the trend of larger organizations anyway centralizing procurement, sometimes placing it, if it's a global organization, in another country than it may have been originally, or instead of having it in multiple countries or multiple markets, consolidated and automated. How does that fit in, Drew, with what's going on, the trend towards organizations wanting to have more of a single centralized AP capability?
Yeah, we see definitely a move toward a shared service or a global process ownership type of thing, where they want to, basically take the variability out of the different geographies or different business units doing what is essentially a standardized process, or they want to make that standardized. Well, that we definitely see the movement in that, and that, frankly, is both a business desire and goal to remove the variability, but it is something that I think is enabled by the technology that we have today in business networks, in centralized systems that can tie all of this together, because now you have business units operating across the world, but tapping in all of that information, getting all the invoices to come into one place through a network. But then those business units can see that. Those business units have access at a controlled pace to the information that they need inside of those systems as well. So I think that the ability to connect the data to everybody, to turn that data not just from information but to intelligence, getting it in front of the right people at the right time in the right process, that business networks really help drive that, and I think that having that centralized network hub where everybody can kind of connect into at the point of the process that they need really helps drive or enable, if you will, the movement toward shared service and centralized accounts payable procurement.
Yeah, I mean, I would add, I would say that I think it'd be pretty hard pressed to make a case that you should have a decentralized AP operation. That doesn't mean that you can't have staff that are geographically dispersed, but there's really not an argument for a reason why that should exist. On the procurement side, right, you can have different reasons if you're sourcing globally, that you can have different centers of excellence. Again, you want to have more of a centralized view into visibility and to be utilizing the same systems and processes. But on the AP side, centralization also helps from a standpoint of you begin to get a better sense of how your resources are what resources are being applied against the AP process today, and it also becomes easier to centralize or to gain budget for investment in tools that really can drive efficiency, that can drive visibility, and all the things that we've just been talking about.
So another thread that I'm hearing in our conversation is that technology needs to be exploited, visibility is gained, automation then is possible, and then centralization can be a huge benefit from all of that. But none of this is possible if we don't go all digital, if we don't get off of manual processes, get off of paper. What do you think is going to be the ratio, if you will, of paper that's left? Are we finally going to pull the last paper invoice out, or the last payment that's manual? Where are we, Drew, when it comes to making that full transition to digital? It seems to me an overwhelmingly beneficial direction, but I know there's still laggards out there.
I've been in the payment space for about 20 years, and the payable space for the last 10. And in payments, there have been predictions in that space that we would get rid of the paper check completely. For the last 20 years, everybody's saying it's going to happen, but it hasn't, right? It's still about 50% paper check. So I'm not going to make a prediction that paper is going to go away, but I will say that it most definitely companies need to move toward electronic data, because paper, even if it's paper-based, right? A lot of companies are moving toward getting the data in electronically, but a lot of them say, okay, well, I get my paper scanned. I send it to a scanning service or whatever, and I get it in PDF, or I get it in electronic data form. And that's fine, and that's one step along the process, but I think companies are realizing that there is a limitation in that, because what happens when you do that is you're simply getting the data that was on that paper source document in faster. And if that paper source document data is garbage, and that's what creates exceptions, then you're just simply getting the exceptions in quicker. And that doesn't really help the process. That doesn't really, solve the true issue of making sure you not only get the data in faster, but that you get it in clean and that you get it in better. And this is where, companies need to move toward, fully electronic invoicing, where it starts its life as an electronic invoice, so that a supplier can submit it and have it run through business rules electronically before it even gets to AP, and can identify the exceptions and turn it around to the supplier and have them correct it, all in a very quick and automated fashion, so that by the time AP gets it, it's 98% exception free or straight through processing. So I think that companies are going to realize that just transforming a paper source document into an electronic form has had value in the past, but its value is quickly running out, and that they're needing to move toward, true electronic. How far we're going to get along that path, well, that's a big prediction to make, but I think we'll move a long way down that path. But companies definitely need to recognize, and are starting to recognize, that they really need to deal with native electronic data in order to truly gain value, efficiency, and to truly gain intelligence and be able to leverage that into other opportunities.
Right. We mentioned exception handling, exception management, making that easier, better, faster, but it strikes me that exception management is really a means to a greater ends. And the greater end is general flexibility, even looking at things as markets, as auctions, where there's variability and fit for purpose kind of mentality can come in. So am I off in some pie in the sky direction, Andrew? Or when we think about the ability to do exception management, are we really opening up the opportunity to do even more interesting, innovative things with business transactions?
No, I don't think it's pie in the sky. I would say that, right, so, one of our recent surveys of about 200 or so AP and finance P2P professionals, the question was asked, what's the number one game changer that will get your AP operation to the next level of performance? And the answer, that came in loud and clear was the reduction of exceptions and the ability to perform root cause analysis in a much more significant way. So, it's a fundamental problem, and the opportunity is, for a majority, I think maybe about 2/3 of organizations feel if they could handle this issue better, if they could reduce that number, they'd be operating at a significantly higher level. The challenge, we haven't really talked too much about the suppliers in this equation, right? But, a lot of business focus and a lot of the themes in our research this year and into 2016 will be focused on, has been focused on agility and the need for organizations to become, more adept and responsive to market shifts and changes. Part of that is getting better alignment with the strategic suppliers that are going to drive more value and that are having a greater impact on the company's own products and services and ultimately their results. And so when you look at something like exceptions that are problematic for both sides of the trading partner equation, when you start to reduce those, when you start to eliminate a lot of the friction that is built in, certainly around a manual P2P process, but can exist even in an automated environment, when that noise in the relationship is reduced, it allows organizations to focus on goals and objectives and to invest more in the strategic elements of the relationship. Right.
Drew, anything to add to that, particularly when we consider that the pool of suppliers is in a sense growing when we look at contingent workers, when we look at different types of suppliers as smaller firms, perhaps located at a much greater geographic distance than in the past, more open markets as a result of connected business networks. How do you see that panning out in 2016?
Yeah, definitely a growth in that. I mean, a lot of, I think, I'm trying to remember what the exact statistic is, but there is a pretty good stat that shows that that a much larger portion of a company's workforce is not bound to that company. Right? It is a temporary, it is contingent workforce, it is services that are not, or contractors that are not necessarily tied to them. I think that the need to handle that, particularly the churn that happens with that, the broader number of contractors that you might have with that, the variability in the services that are asked for, that are needed, all of this adds layers of complexity potentially to accounts payable and not to procurement as well, but we're focused more on accounts payable here. But it adds layers of complexity in managing that and approving that, and as a result can add a significant number of exceptions. So while you're operating your business in a way that is a little bit more fitting in today's world, you're also adding a lot of complexity and exceptions to the process, unless you've got a way to automatically build in the ability to define the invoice or to identify the exceptions, so that these various suppliers, now much smaller and geographically dispersed, can submit online or can submit electronically and can do so in a way that is standardized even across this large group, that the exceptions can be caught right away, that for example, field services, if there's a service sheet form that was put out by procurement to hire somebody to go fix an oil well, and they get out to the oil well and there's more to be done than what was on that, and they have to get approval for that. To have the ability to get that approval online automatically through a mobile device and have it tied directly into the invoice and have the invoice created with that, that eliminates all those potential breakpoints of finally getting that invoice in and getting the exceptions dealt with and approved. And exceptions, to me, are not just a matter of, gosh, they're hard to do and there's something we want to get rid of, but exceptions are simply the barrier to the opportunity that comes when you can get that invoice moved through and approved right away. It's not necessarily a matter of paying the invoice faster from the payer's perspective, but the ability to have it approved and ready to go right away so that you have options, and so that the supplier has options potentially for cash flow and things like that. So exceptions become something that we have to eliminate in order to get to that opportunity. But without the platform to do that, to your point, the dispersed workforce and all the increasing contractors can make that even harder than it is or than it has been.
So when we look at the payoffs from doing things better using intelligence and technology, we're not just looking at, say, efficiency for its sake. I think you're opening up more opportunity, as you put it, to the larger business. So if procurement and accounts payable can adjust and react rapidly to complexity, to exceptions, to new ways of doing business, this is a powerful tool to the business at large, so that they can go at markets differently. They can acquire goods and services across a wider portfolio of choice, a wider marketplace, therefore able to perhaps get things easier, faster, cheaper. So let's look at this idea of the sort of non-tangible payoffs that elevates the value of accounts payable being a sophisticated, intelligent organization. Let's start with Andrew. What are some of the intangibles? If we do all the above that we've mentioned well, how does this empower the organization in ways that we haven't seen before?
I think that's a great question, right? And I think it gets back to the one point I was just making about agility, but really, if you were to argue that we're operating in an age of innovation where globalization and the level of competition and the speed of business in general has really accelerated the time frames that organizations must. I think business is just happening at a much faster pace, and you can see that in areas like the consumer electronics market and really all industries, right? Product life cycles are shortening, and so the windows of opportunity to really maximize sales and revenues in the marketplace are much shorter as well. So things are happening at a much faster clip and in tighter time frames. This has created a much greater reliance upon your suppliers and upon your supply chain. And so, having visibility across the P2P process, across the source to settle process, having much tighter relationships with your strategic suppliers, ultimately gets or positions the organization to become much more agile and much more competitive. And I think that's the value. That's the value dividend that is created from a more streamlined P2P process, right? It's being able to more fully optimize the relationships that you have with your suppliers, and it's being able to make decisions and shifts in a much faster way than in the past, right? And that's not just from the sourcing side, that carries all the way through to the payment side as well.
Yeah. So, Drew, when we think about the strategic role of AP, business agility, and fostering that and making that possible, you can't get more strategic than that.
No, that's right. And I think that accounts payable particularly can become the source of much of that strategic intelligence that companies need, right? They can not just see themselves as processing paper or back office cost center, but as being the ones that capture, that can, through their use of systems and investment in systems and networks, can capture the data in invoices, for example, can feed that data into the sourcing cycle at the beginning, so it becomes a virtuous circle, if you will. They can create the opportunity for the company to meet some of their very strategic goals around working capital. So now accounts payable and their ability to tie into what procurement has done before them and automate the process and get things done very nimbly and ready to go and create this opportunity. They're creating opportunity for Treasury as well. So now you've got a third party in there. So the Treasurer is very concerned about, what are his liabilities out there? What are the payments liabilities? Does he know? Oftentimes in today's world, Treasurers can't see their payables liabilities until they run through their payment cycle and they're ready to be paid the next day. And so they have to move cash around to make sure that they have enough cash to manage those liabilities going out. Well, with visibility into, what's going to be paid out 30 days from now, having that 30 days in advance, well, gosh, that offers the treasurer all sorts of options on how to manage their cash amongst various different bank accounts. Plus, it gives them the option to do things around their days payable outstanding, to bring in third parties into a business network, to bring in third-party supply chain finance, to allow a supplier who might need early payment liquidity and early cash flow to access that through a third party, while the buying organization is able to hold on to their cash and so extend their days payable outstanding and so improve their working capital management. Or it gives the treasurer the opportunity to pay that supplier early using excess cash that's sitting in a bank account. Even though the Fed just raised rates, in the last day or two, they only raised it 0.25%, so it's still not earning very much. But now a treasurer can take that and they can pay a supplier early in exchange for a discount that earns them something along the lines of 8 to 12% annually. So it opens up options, but right at the nexus of all of that opportunity and information and intelligence now sits AP. And so that's a very strategic place for AP to be if they can get their hands around that data, create those opportunities, and make it visible to the rest of the business.
Okay, one last area to get into for 2016. One of the top concerns, in addition to business agility for companies and organizations, is risk security and dealing with compliance issues, regulatory issues. Mm-hmm. Is there something that AP brings to the table when it's elevated itself to the strategic level with that visibility, with that data, with the ability to act quickly and be able to take on exceptions and work through them? First to you, Andrew. We've heard about how on the procurement side, that examining the supply chain, knowing that supply chain, being able to head off interruptions or other issues, having business continuity mindset is important. Does that translate over to AP, and why and how does AP perhaps have a larger role in issues around continuity?
Sure. So I would take it back to the first part and say that from a risk mitigation standpoint, right? When you have greater assurances that the invoices are matched to the PO, to the purchase, to the orders that have been generated, to what has been delivered, when you have a clear view into how that payment is made across and into the supplier's account. You're minimizing, or you're reducing the opportunities for fraud, which can exist in any type of environment, manual or fully automated. And so I think that's one of the one of the largest risk mitigation opportunities for AP is really at the transactional level. When you start to cascade the visibility that AP generates out into the larger organization, I think that you can start to do some predictive analysis from the procurement side to better understand potential issues that suppliers may be facing. And then also from a treasury standpoint, right, when you have visibility, into the huge amounts of monies that are being paid out by AP, you have a better sense of your own company, of your company's liquidity, and your cash positions, and what you need to do to ensure that you maintain that liquidity. Looking on the supplier side, right, when you've got, when you're processing invoices more quickly and you have the opportunities to make payments early, there are those opportunities for the larger companies to step in and help out some of their struggling suppliers, whether that's, paying their invoices early or, some other mechanism. So it starts with visibility, and from that visibility, you start to have better ability to make smarter decisions and to anticipate potential issues.
Great. Last word to you, Drew, on this issue of risk reduction, continuity, using intelligence to head off disruption or fraud. How do you see that panning out in 2016?
Yeah, I think AP does play a large role in that. I think Andrew touched on some of that. One of the key areas, if you think about supply chain and from the procurement side, the financial supply chain is pretty much just as important as the physical supply chain when it comes to risk. As we learned, I think people have gotten deep in their bones since 2008 and 9. When liquidity became a very big issue and there was liquidity risk in supply chains and suppliers who couldn't access cash flow or didn't have sufficient cash flow. They may have had otherwise healthy business, but not sufficient cash flow to maintain operations, and that hurt buying organizations who depend on them. Well, by being able to approve invoices very quickly and offer up to your suppliers through a single portal, single network access to cash, either from a buying company using their own or bringing in third-party financing, you essentially are able to eliminate or greatly mitigate liquidity risk in your supply chain. And but there's other areas of risk too. Anytime you're talking about accounts payable, I think Andrew said it the right way, where he said, the massive amounts of money that accounts payable is paying out. I mean, that's their job. Well, in order to do that, they have to actually capture, manage, and maintain bank account information from their suppliers in order to pay electronically. Everybody's trying to get away from paper checks because paper checks, we know, are rife with fraud, very horribly opaque and very slow. But electronic payments require them to capture bank account information, and that's not a core competency of most AP departments. But AP departments can tap into the power of network ecosystems that bring in third parties whose core competency that very much is, to eliminate their need to ever even see a supplier's bank account information. So I think some forward-looking accounts payable departments are looking at how can they divest themselves of that which is not their core competency. And in some ways around risk mitigation and payment, that's one of them, is getting rid of having to touch bank account information. But beyond that, when we talk about compliance and that type of thing, accounts payable sits right in the middle of that, whether that be from VAT compliance in Europe to archival compliance to SOX compliance here in the U.S. Having all of the data electronic and having an auditable trail and being able to know exactly where every piece of data and every dollar spent or euro spent has been and where it went along the way, and having a trail of that automatically captured and archived, that goes a long way toward compliance. So an accounts payable really is the one that sits right there to be able to capture that and provide that.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored BriefingsDirect podcast discussion on the changing role and impact of accounts payable as a strategic business force. And we've learned how intelligent accounts payable is rapidly transforming, like better managing exceptions, adopting fuller automation, and implementing end-to-end processes that leverage connected business networks. So please join me in thanking our guests. We've been here with Andrew Bartolini, the Chief Research Officer at Ardent Partners in Boston. Thank you, Andrew.
My pleasure.
And also we've been joined by Drew Hoffler, Senior Director of Marketing at SAP Ariba. Thanks so much, Drew.
And thank you, Dana.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining this SAP-sponsored Business Innovation Thought Leadership discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator. Thanks again for listening, and do come back